So, welcome to my lecture about decoding jazz improvisation. Introduction for the classical musician. In a way, it's funny because it's the same lecture that I've been working and reworking time and again, and I try to get it as accurate as I can every time. So whoever is here is kind of gaining from past experience, which is the name of the game, I think, in everything that we do and try to do well. Today, we'll start by covering the jazz elements, things that make it jazz. Um, Probably a lot of these will be familiar for you, but just to create some kind of a common language for us all. Then we'll talk about jazz renditions, what actually happens when a jazz musician plays a tune, okay, or a few musicians together. I'll briefly talk about the differences between classical and jazz performances. Each one of these things is enough to cover entire to span for an entire lecture, of course, and I do have actually lectures for each one of these topics, but I'm trying to just touch upon things that will all come together. Then learning jazz skills. I'll introduce the way I teach jazz. I have to say quite successfully, judging from the results of my students for the past 15 years, or to be more accurate, probably been teaching for 16 years, but successfully maybe a bit less than that. So again, trial and error. I've been adding new materials and taking away materials that were not so successful, and how I encourage people to practice jazz skills, and how then we go from skills to art. That touches upon a question that was just asked a second ago about creativity. And at the end, I'll introduce my 5-day challenge for any of you who wish to try hands-on some of my ideas. So before I go on, I'll just play a little tune. I'll play the song All of Me. I'm assuming most of you know it. Why don't you write in the chat if you do know this song, and I'll just do some kind of a jazz rendition of it, okay? So it goes like this. That's the melody, right? Why not take all of me? Originally it's a song with lyrics. This is the improvisation part, right? The big mystery. Okay, so this was a little introduction, and let's see what happened here. First of all, thank you. This was Improvised, okay? I cannot repeat what I just did because I simply don't remember it. By the way, if you saw me doing this, it's not that this is some kind of a tick I have, but just the microphone. I could not see my keyboard because of the microphone until I moved it a little. That's all. So, so this is improvised, and let's see what's happening here. So, first of all, when we talk about jazz, there are many subgenres. I wrote some of them here. This can be very confusing. If I equate this to classical music, just imagine you have, Renaissance, early Baroque, high Baroque, classical style, then Romantic and post-Romantic and Impressionistic and 12 tone and all of that. There are many, 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 many types. So we're not going to cover any of these. We're going to be talking about mainstream jazz. In other words, if you just like turn on the radio, you say, look, this sounds like jazz, what it means. Or if some jazz musicians get together and say, let's play the standard, let's say this song, All of Me, what they would do would sound roughly like what I just played here. So what are the elements? We'll try to cover the sound, the rhythm, the harmony, repertoire, and improvisation. Things that, again, make jazz sound jazz. I'm not a big fan of definitions because is this jazz, just is this not? I'd rather say this has these kind of elements of jazz. So if, let's say, if it has 3 out of the 5, it's probably jazz, right? But let's not argue about whether some specific, just an example, the Cologne concert of Keith Jarrett, is that jazz or not? I'm not going to answer that, okay? So, sound. First of all, the first thing we hear is what instruments are being played. The most common instruments are piano, bass, drums, saxophone, and trumpet. Now, I know we can play jazz in other instruments. I can whistle jazz, right? But if we take now, let's say, the 100, the 1,000 most popular jazz recordings ever, we'll see these instruments time and again. And they originated mostly in marching bands, of course, not the piano, but the saxophone and the trumpet. And we have the components of bass, chord, and melody. This is not some kind of a very complex theory, right? If I have I also have here bass, chord, and melody, and most tonal music works like this. However, in jazz, we usually have ensemble playing, with the bass playing the bass, chord being played either by left hand of the piano or both hands of the piano or guitar, and melody can be played by the right hand of the piano or again a guitar or any what we call horn player, which is not horn, French horn, but it's saxophone or trumpet, any wind instrument. Solo instrument is the exception. Just 1 second, I'll ask my daughter to turn down the guitar. Sorry, my daughter got a new electric guitar, so it's lots of fun, but it's a bit confusing for me. So solo instrument is the exception simply because if I am to play it on the piano, as you saw, I had to get somewhere around it. I was playing like this, kind of bass and chord in the same hand. There is always some kind of a compromise. Ideally, we have a bass player playing what we call a walking bass, and the left hand of the pianist playing the chords, right? And okay, so it's essentially chamber music. It's music that's played in groups. Now, another clear element of the sound is that the sound imitates speaking. This lecture is meant for classically trained. I'm sure you've all heard your teachers tell you, sing it. Think how a singer would sing it. By the way, I have to tell you that once I worked with a singer in a voice lesson, and the voice teacher said, think how a string instrument would play it. So it sounds like the others, the neighbor's lawn is always more musical. But, you know, we have this ideal of a singing line, right? Whereas in jazz, we imitate the speech. And this means that the default articulation is non-legato. It's not connected line, but non-legato. It does not mean that it's mechanical. By no means, it's just non-legato. Jazz scatting, that's the funny thing, it imitates the playing, which actually imitates the speaking. So jazz singers trying to sound like instruments that actually try to sound like people speaking. Okay, and the expression is usually through accents, so we don't have these like graded lines again, but again, like when we speak, this is probably the single hardest thing for people to grasp, not to, intellectually, but to actually play. When I train people who've been classically trained at the piano, to consistently separate the notes from one another and not try to make them into singing lines. Now, rhythm. The meter in jazz is usually 4/4, sometimes 3/4. I'm repeating, the meter is usually 4/4, sometimes 3/4. Not that we don't have other meters, and in modern jazz they are very common. We have 7/8, we have 15/8, we have all sorts of things, but in what you call again mainstream jazz, we have 4/4 and 3/4. I've played with fantastic drummers who could hardly keep a 5/4 time. They were seasoned jazz players because that's what they usually do in jazz. It comes from the tradition of swing. The word swing has a few meanings, but first of all, the dance is actually in 2/2, right? It originated in New Orleans style. So 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1. And specifically with what we call the second line march beat. Second line meaning it was the second line of drummers in the marching band, and they did something like from that we got the walking bass and the kind of 4/4 or 2/2. That's a bit complicated, we won't get into that, but it's definitely not a compound meter of, let's say, 7/8 or something like that. Now, another meaning of the word swing has to do with swinging eighths. This means that the eighths are one long and one short. So we have pa pi da pi da pi da pi da pi da pi da. Not that 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 that. So regular eighth would be swinging eighth. Okay, and just to make sure, again, we won't get into it. It's not dotted rhythm. It's not and it's not triplets. It's something more subtle than that. Pa 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 pa. And it actually depends on the speed and also the taste of the player, but mostly depends on the pace of the piece. If we play something slow, it's more like a triplet. If it's fast, they're almost straight eighths, almost identical to one another. There is some jazz with straight eighths. That's jazz that comes from Brazilian music or from Cuban. Let's say if I do so that exists as well. And then we have the syncopation, which is probably the most important aspect in jazz. Syncopation means playing things that not are on the beat and not playing things that are on the beat. So if I have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and if I do da body buddy be booty beady booty boo boo baby be do booty be ba bam, I'm now on the beat. If I do do beddy ba 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 be do ba 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 beddy ba 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 ba. Now I'm avoiding the beat. These are syncopations. When I say that syncopations are inherent in the English language, I mean that if you take now a bunch of songs that are written in English, more in American English, but also in British English, you'll find out that more often than not, the rhythm of the song is syncopated. If you take something like this, the note, I'm not with the accompaniment. I'm not on the beat. If I were on the beat, it would sound more like German music or Israeli music or other types of music that don't have syncopations inherent in the language. Again, this is on the beat. As opposed to and if you take a lead sheet of many songs, American songs, you would find all these syncopations. You see these kind of ties tying the notes over the bar lines. So it's do 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 and not do 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 do. Okay. There is a question here about walking bass in jazz versus Baroque music. I'll say very briefly that it's very similar. The idea is that the bass has three functions. First function, it helps with the rhythm. So it does quarters. If we're in Baroque, or if it's jazz. So first of all, it has quarters. That's why it's called walking bass. Dun, 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 dun. Second function, it shows the harmony. It outlines the harmony. So it helps us hear usually first of all, the chord, the root of the chord. Sometimes maybe the three of the chord, even the seventh, whatever is most dominant and helps us hear the harmony. And then thirdly, it can create some melodic lines, some line that sounds like a melody. So instead of doing, let's say, I did All of Me before, right? So All of Me with only rhythm would be, that will be the rhythm, the bass, dead boring, right? Now I outline the harmony, and that sounds also very boring, although I hear the harmony. Once I create some kind of melodic context, okay, so now I'm combining all three elements, and as far as I know, these are identical for Baroque and jazz, except for the fact that in jazz the bass part is improvised, and in Baroque music it's written out. Okay, onward, harmony. The basic harmony in jazz is functional harmony, as in classical music. Functional meaning the harmony operates within a framework of progression. I have one harmony. This goes here, which goes there. This is the five of this. This is the five of this, of the five of this, five of this, for example, okay? We don't just like put different harmonies as colors, just shifting them. It does exist in other types of jazz, but mainstream jazz uses functional harmony mainly because the tunes that we played are actually not jazz tunes. We'll get to that in a minute. The repertoire is earlier than jazz. Another thing that is typical to jazz is fast harmonic rhythm. Okay, it was not the case in All of Me that I played, but let's say if I take a song like Over the Rainbow, and it goes somewhere over the rainbow. I think these are the original chords. And I do a jazz rendition, it will be somewhere over the rainbow. So jazz music kind of favors fast harmonic rhythms. And then there is extensive use of applied 2/5 chords, which I also just demonstrated. Instead of I'm going here, I'm going to do the 2/5 of this. 2/5, 2/5, 2/5, 2/5, and so on. Probably the most recognizable feature of jazz. Yes, someone has a question or no? Probably the most recognizable feature of jazz harmony is the seventh chords. The basic chord is the seventh chord. We did not hear triads. It's very rare to hear triads in jazz. Again, there are some branches of jazz that do it, but mainstream jazz uses the seventh chord as a basic chord, and it's also a stable chord, meaning if I end a piece, so this has now the sixth, the seventh, and the ninth, and I'm all fine with this. I'm not ending here. Whereas in classical music, even let's say a piece like the Berg Sonata, Alban Berg Sonata was written in 1906 till 1906, has some cuckoo harmonies in it, right? It starts with here stays on the ninth chord and very, very chromatic. Some would even say atonal. At the very end, you have a triad B minor chord. Same with Mahler music. So in classical music, even with complex harmony, we usually go all the way at the end to a triad. Whereas in jazz, there is no problem resolving to seventh chords, and very often we use chords with 4, 5, 6, and even more notes. So again, things like this that are considered stable. And these are often called tensions. The improvisation can be based on extended harmony. Just briefly, I can improvise on these chord tones, or the upper structures, even completely out. That's also acceptable. I'm not sure, Albert, what your question is, so maybe you can rephrase it. Okay. The repertoire. When we play jazz, again, some folks meet and want to play something. They usually pick a standard. A standard is a song that became part of the standard repertoire, something that everybody knows. It was familiar, popular music of the time. We're talking about the 20s to the 40s. And note that this is before jazz really started. Okay, these are songs that everybody knew. Mostly they were show tunes, meaning tunes from musical theater, sometimes pop songs, sometimes from movies. And very often, nobody thought that they could be jazz songs until some prominent singers made them popular. And then some famous jazz artist played them, and all of a sudden became jazz standard. An example would be, All of Me, for example, was not a jazz tune. I'm sorry, I don't remember where it came from. But a song like Autumn Leaves, this was actually a French song, okay, from a movie from '46. And then it became popular. I'm not sure who sang it first in the States, but then Miles Davis recorded it in G minor in this key, and since then everybody performs it in G minor, although this also was not the original key, by the way. Another example, Fly Me to the Moon, originally actually in 3/4. I think it was Frank Sinatra first sang it in 4. Fly me to the moon. And since then, everybody's been playing it in 4/4 as a jazz song. Sometimes we also have jazz tunes written by jazz artists. Okay, things like Take the A Train by Duke Ellington, or Blue Bossa of forgot the name, trumpet player. Anyway, sorry. And in order for something to work in jazz, we have to have sufficient harmonic movement. I'm putting this in because usually someone asks at this point, what about doing Mozart in jazz? So the thing is that a progression like Mozart's, like this, we have a 1, 5/4, 4, and then 7, all in the base of 1. But this in jazz, it's like nothing happened in jazz context. Okay, taking Baroque music would work better, because then we have very often movement of descending fifth, and we have a faster harmonic movement. So it really depends. The other thing is the form of the song, and we'll get to that in a minute. And now the aspect we're all waiting for, improvisation. So improvisation in jazz is based on the harmony. Um, I put here a number of other genres where there is improvisation, such as blues, Indian music, Arabic music, Jewish music, rock music, and even classical music. And you can see in many of them, the improvisation is based on a certain key or makam or raga, depending on where you are in the world. Whereas in jazz, we improvise over the harmony, meaning what I play has to fit the harmony of the song. If I do dwa ba ba, there is this chord, right? Dwa da da dwa ba ba. Now this chord, my improvisation, okay? Clearly, I'm playing over these chords. A good example for the two ways of improvisation would be taking this progression, hit the road jack fret. By the way, this bass line has been around for 5 centuries, I think, or so. So we have 3 chords here. This one is the same chord, just added note, but the bass is walking down, right? This chord, and this chord. This chord, a chord, chord. As a blues player or rock player, I may just do I'm basically playing on a pentatonic scale here, maybe add a blue note here, essentially ignoring the chords. As a jazz player, you heard that? I'm improvising over this chord now, this chord, this chord. Again, if I note. So the question is whether whether I'm fitting my melodies to the chords or not. The improvisation is not based on the melody. This may surprise some people. Of course, in the beginning of improvisation, of jazz improvisation, there were embellishments of the melody. Early days of Louis Armstrong, we can hear that. But in what we call real jazz, again, mainstream jazz, there are cases that the melody is kind of being cited within the improvisation, but that's the exception to the rule. It's a special moment where the improviser is actually relating to the original melody. And also improvisation is not based on modes. I'm putting 3 exclamation points here because I know that modes, improvisation by modes is being taught widely all over the world. I'm yet to find proof that anybody was doing it before there was modal jazz. Modal jazz started at the end of the 50s, meaning after the canonization of the style of mainstream jazz. I believe it's a historic mistake to teach it like that. I asked ChatGPT to find one evidence, and he couldn't, or it couldn't. It tried to give me all sorts of other things of tunes that use modal writing and so on, but there is no evidence that anybody used modes for mainstream jazz improvisation. So the improvisation follows the chord progressions of the tunes, and something that we have to remember that our Western ears of tonal music, we seek harmony and we hear it all the time. There is always some kind of a harmony, even if no one plays it. If I play something like this, let's say, okay, that was intentionally in a different key than was played before. Your brains probably are completing something like maybe this, maybe this, probably not this. Okay, it can be various things, but it's very difficult for us to hear a note without some harmony around it. And the one big principle of all tonal music, all the melodies in tonal music, is that the melodies collide into chord tones. What this means, essentially, is that the melody has to end with the note that belongs to the chord. So if I do this, I can play even this note, which is kind of cuckoo here, would work if it ends here. Even this, but I have to end it there. If I do this, it would work. This would not. Maria, right? Would work, and this would not. And ideally, as improvisers, we think of some kind of a melody, buddy beep, deep, buddy bop, and then if the chord is this, if it's this, I'll fit my idea into the harmony. I will not be a slave of the harmony, but rather use the harmony for my ideas. Now, lastly, just one little thing about improvisation versus composition. Charger here. Very often, if you care, why don't you take a second and write what you think the difference is between improvisation and composition? Just briefly before I put my words in. I'll tell you what I usually hear. Very often people say things like, well, when you improvise, you can do whatever you want. That's one thing. Or I hear improvisation is not planned. Or I hear there are no rules in improvisation. Things like that. And it's always interesting because improvisation and composition can be with rules or without rules. And if I can do whatever I want, that's true also for a composition. If I write a piece, I can do whatever I want, right? And about not thinking, the really big difference is almost the opposite of what I just said that people often say. When I compose something, I have the freedom of going back and rewriting it. I can write an entire page and erase it. I'm now improvising a lecture. I have my notes in front of me, right? But if I say something that I regret later, there is no going back. You guys heard it. It's improvised. If I were to read from something that I had written earlier, that would not be the case. I can write an entire page and erase it, like maybe some slides that I prepared and chose to discard. So in a way, when I improvise, I actually have to be much more careful and much more planned. I cannot just say whatever I want. When I compose, I can say, you know what, I'll just write this. And I'm like, no, I didn't like it. I can have as many sketches as I want, as many drafts as I want. I can just discard everything. I can keep everything. I can reorganize it and edit it. I cannot do it when it's improvised. And regarding rules, again, it's almost the opposite. Let's say I want to compose a piece where the piano plays for 3 bars and then we go into 3/4 time and then the bass player plays and then I do something else and so on. I cannot do this when I improvise. When I improvise, I have to keep a set of rules in order to improvise together with other people. If I don't adhere to the rules, we will not be able to do it together. Okay, so it's almost the opposite than the answers I usually get. I'll see that. Now, another thing that happens in jazz music is that everything is improvised. So the bass line, as we mentioned earlier, is improvised. The bass usually would play quarters, but the notes are improvised. The accompanying figures are improvised. And you can do ba, 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 ba. And of course, the melody is improvised. The drummer improvises all the time. Does not play ching, 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 but and it works again because everybody goes with the same rules. They know where they are and what's acceptable and what's not. Okay, we're going to the next section of this lecture, jazz rendition of tunes. Briefly, this is a very short summary of an entire lecture I have. Just to understand what's happening when we go and play jazz in a group. First of all, we play the melody of the song, often related to as a head, right? We played at the beginning, we played at the end. And in between, we improvise over the harmonic progression of the form repeatedly. So, to look a bit like this, the melody that we hear is the tune. Earlier, I did all of me, right? Then improvisation, sound one, and the tune again. I did earlier only one round of improvisation right here, and then back to the tune. The harmony just repeats itself time and again of the tune. It repeats, 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 repeats. I play the tune, I improvise over the harmony. And in jazz lingo, we call it the head in, we play a first chorus, second chorus. It's like I took one chorus in my improvisation, for example, and then the head out. And generally, we do not break the form of the song. Okay, it's not that all of a sudden we'll say, okay, I feel like playing a shorter solo, I'll play only half, unless we agree on it intentionally beforehand and create some kind of an arrangement. This means that someone can hum the song repeatedly throughout the performance. So let's say I did all of me, end of the head in, and now first improvisation start. Ba ba ba, da 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 ba, do di bo da da ba, we do da. It's a bit confusing for me to do both, but that's the idea. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some tunes where we improvise over only one part of the tune, such as in Spain of Chick Corea. The tune is long, it has like 3 sections, like this one, and so on, but the improvisation goes only over these chords. Set of, I think, 8 bars, if I'm not wrong, that goes time and again. Sometimes improvising over a chord progression that does not even belong in the song, doesn't exist in the song. I think the song Red Clay by Freddie Hubbard worked like this. And sometimes the improvisation is just over one chord. In the rendition of My Favorite Things by John Coltrane, that's what he does. He plays through the song, changes the chords, but then the entire improvisation, it's basically modal improvisation over kind of E minor Dorian, I guess one could call it. Now, the tunes have forms, usually. Very rarely we have a tune which is through composed. One very common form is AABA. For example, I listed here a number of examples. If we go, let's say, Over the Rainbow, which I think everybody here knows, I hope. That's the A part, it repeats, and then the B part will be this. And then again the A part. Or Girl from Ipanema. That's the A part. B part is this one. And so on, and then again 8, 8, 8, 8 bars, altogether 32 bars. The other very common form is ABAC or AA prime, such as All of Me, which I played. So both the A part would be, right, and then the B, again A, and C. Okay. We have some other forms, some songs in 16-bar forms, there's 12-bar blues, and some irregular forms. I just listed a few here just to have an idea. And then what happens is that this form, the AABA, again, the harmony repeats and repeats and repeats, but it means that harmony-wise, we usually do not even have 32 bars, we have 16 bars. And if I go back to the question, why don't you take a classical piece and improvise over it? Classical music has exactly the other tendency of not repeating, unless it's theme and variations. So, for example, when I did once a concert of some Chopin nocturnes, which I arranged in jazz, if I do this, I change the harmony a bit, but this nocturne section and then B section. And it goes back to A. It's easy to improvise over. But if I take something like Chopin Ballade or something like that, even the themes themselves are not written in a way that is conclusive. They are written in a way that leads to the next section and next section. It's in the basics of the aesthetics of classical music to have something that leads to the next section, not just end and start again. And if it does end at start again, which happens, it would often end in a different key than the original key because there is a modulation. Let's say when we lead from first theme to second theme. So it does not really work so easily. Now, we can have some intros, can be written out, can be vamped, can be solo, can be rubato. That means out of rhythm. It's not the sense of classical music when we stretch the time. If I do this, this is what we call a rubato intro. Okay. And we can have some ending. Again, sometimes written out, sometimes solo, sometimes a cadenza, and very often a 3-time tag. That's kind of it was a kind of extensive 3-time tag, but that's the idea. It was with the turnaround, actually. I won't get into that because I see we're short in time and I want to go on. If anybody cares, I do have this lecture, entire lecture on renditions of jazz tunes. Now, some musicians can add rhythmic harmonic arrangements. Let's say, all of me, ba-dee-ba-ba. Why not take all of me? Ba-ba-dee. And sometimes with different harmony. Yeah. Sometimes melodic, sometimes half written, half improvised. Okay, onward. So, classical versus jazz. I think this is the moment that some of you have been waiting for. So let's see what's happening really. Why us classical musicians, trained classical musicians, cannot improvise jazz? It's because we do some things that are completely different. The classical musician plays given notes. It's a written score. Whereas the jazz musician makes up the music as we go. So the classical musician resembles an actor receiving a play, a script, and having to act it. And jazz musician resembles more an improvising lecture, like I'm doing now, right? I have some topics, but I'm actually improvising the exact text. I would never dream of improvising a classical sonata, for example. Again, I actually have an entire lecture about the relationship of classical and jazz and spoken word and how they can relate to one another in language. So as classical musicians, we focus on how to play. Okay, I have the notes. And that's my focus. That's what I really work on. I don't question for a second what the notes are unless I don't know, like checking some editions or versions. The jazz musician focuses on what to play. And hopefully also on the how. Some jazz musicians, especially students, are lost in the what, and they play really nice things, but they play them not in a nice way. And then they're kind of stuck. They don't sound as good just because they forget the how, but it's actually pretty difficult. If I stop for a second and talk about the stress, because I play both, I teach both, it's very interesting because playing classical music for many people find it more stressful than playing jazz because it can be judged more easily. First of all, you have to play the right notes. You have to play the right piece at the right pace. So there is some kind of aversion to compare to, even some kind of abstract version on the page, even not if not a version of that we all know from other listenings, right? As a jazz musician, I have the freedom. Let's say I told everybody I'm going to play all of me, but my fingers are cold. So instead of playing all of me, I can play. I can play it slowly. Why not? I can play it in different key. If I run out of ideas, I can just take some dramatic pause. No one says I have to play a certain thing. I can do. I can also do. So in a way, it's much easier. On the other hand, as a jazz musician, I have this extreme pressure to come up with ideas. It's like a comedian who has to, who's given some themes for jokes and has to come up with something funny all the time, or at least something witty. In a group, it's even more demanding. It's like a panel of some people who talk together about a topic, and they have to keep being interesting and compelling for the audience to actually stay there. It's not that I'm playing a piece written by some kind of a master, be it Chopin or Bach, and then, the music is fantastic. It's not my responsibility. Or someone can say, I didn't like the second movement. I'm like, well, that's not my problem. He wrote it, and he's been dead for 200 years. Here, I'm the one who is giving the ideas. Completely up to me, different kind of pressure. Okay. Now, in theory, classical musicians can play pieces without understanding anything. It would be like me. I lived in Vienna for a few years, and I took some German class, and my pronunciation was probably, not probably, was better than, definitely better than average for the level I was speaking. And I recall once in a class I had to read something, and I made all my efforts to pronounce things right, and the teacher was really, really happy with it. I did not understand a word of what I said. I was just concentrating in the pronunciation. And we have these cases. I see them with students all the time. I sit with myself sometimes when I get a piece that I don't understand. I can play the right notes at the right time. It does not mean that I understand what's going on there. It does not mean that I have the background historical, and also if there are any references, or just understanding, hearing the harmonic progression and things like that. Jazz musicians cannot do that. They have to understand how it works. In other words, I could speak German without understand German, but I cannot, not speak, I could recite a text in German, but I cannot have a conversation in German, even basic conversation, if I do not understand what's being said. Now, in classical music, we can plan and master interpretation. In jazz, it's much more difficult. I can plan, but I may change it completely on stage. Now, it's true that some classical musicians do it as well, and I think these are magical moments. But very often, if we hear repeating performances of the same artist playing classical music, we'll hear very similar interpretations. Whereas with jazz musicians, some of them completely change everything. It happened to me to plan a certain rendition of a tune and then go on stage, start it, and then do something completely different. I will say though that no, I'll say it in a minute when I get to the ensemble. Now, as classical musicians, we practice specific pieces of music, and I'm sure you all know this feeling that you gave a concert or something, and then a month later someone asks you, oh, can you just play something you played so beautifully last month? And they're like, oh, no, I didn't practice since. It's not in my fingers, right? This is not something that happens in jazz. We have a certain level of improvisation. If we know the tune, we can play it. It's a different kind of way. It's again, if I speak in language, someone tells me, oh, let's speak together in French, and I cannot say, oh, no, last month I could speak French, but now I cannot speak it anymore. It does not work like this. It's a different thing. Of course, sometimes we have specific tunes that are very complicated with arrangements, and it can arise. Now, in a group situation, classical musicians go and rehearse interpretations together. And they rehearse the interpretation. Very often the cellist would ask the pianist to take more time here, and the other one would ask the other one to play softer so you can bring up this line, and they can fight over these things. In jazz music, it's more of rehearsing the interaction, because they don't know what's going to happen actually on stage. It's all improvised. So there is not much room for planning. At the same time, classical music top groups that work a lot, such as string quartets, they work together for years in order to be able also to change their interpretations on the go. And this can happen also both in jazz and classical music. Again, we talk about the top level. When there is a well-rehearsed group with a well-rehearsed interpretation, and one of the people chooses to go somewhere else, very often the others will feel confident enough to go because there is a solid interpretation behind. So they will agree to do something that was not agreed on. Of course, depends on the person and the character and so on, but I find this is the general rule. At this point, I'd like to dedicate a few minutes to talk about learning jazz by ear and the blind spots that happen. I'm guilty of them, okay? I learned most of my jazz playing by ear. And it's very interesting to see when I see students and people around me what happens. So the first thing that happens for pianists is that the use of left hand, they basically have no idea what to do with it, because we listen mostly to the right hand of the piano player. So they play it on some kind of automatic way, and it can be used in a way that, let's say, that does not bother the right hand if they're lucky, but very often not in a way that actually enhances the right hand playing. And it's because the by ear way of learning, the question is what you listen to with your ear. Do you listen to the drums? Do you listen to the bass? Or you listen to only to the soloist? And I think that happens. People play the one. They play one. I mean, both the first beat, but also the one of the chord. If I have, this is the chord, one, instead of avoiding it. The sound, I mentioned that playing legato, right? Instead of ba-de, 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 bap. Lack of consistency, I hear this a lot, kind of putting ideas from all over the place, both in sound, in harmony especially. Playing sometimes chords like this, and then chord like this, a triad all of a sudden, and being all over the place with that. Staying too close to the harmony again, it's a theoretical thing, but creating melodies will be more interesting. Lack of voice leading, this is a major one, especially for accompanying, but also in playing. And of course, disorganized solos, sounding like a bunch of ideas. Some of them are really fantastic and great, but it's like taking great ideas from different books, putting them together, and not understanding why we did not get a great novel out of that. Ideas have to be coherent. They have to lead to one another. They have to share some kind of a character, and then they have to change that character together. Okay, so how do we actually learn the jazz elements one by one? Tons of material today, but I hope you guys are following and enjoying. So we had sound, rhythm, harmony, repertoire, and improvisation. Learning sound. First of all, being consistent. Easier said than done, of course. We want to have an attack simply by pressing faster into the keys or whatever instrument you're having, pressing faster on the piano and getting all the way to the bottom of the key. If I do this, not all the way to the bottom, I don't have this attack. I don't have enough of a percussive character. Of course, sometimes I can want this sound, but generally speaking, you know, I want this sound. Speech, like we talked about it, and being expressive. Rhythm. First of all, getting the swing feel. Again, it's something that has to be learned. Depending, some people get more easily. It really depends on what music you've been listening to, and yet what music you grew up listening to. I see people whose parents, I should say, listen to music that has swing in it, swing feel or rhythmic, more of black music. They usually have easier time with it. People who grew up on classical music usually have harder time. It really depends, but you want to swing, not just the swinging eights, pa pa da ba da, but the real pap ba dee ba dee ba ba da ba dee ba dee, the real feel. And again, there's a 2 feel versus 4. I touched on this earlier. Although the bass plays quarters, I want to feel it in 2. 1, 2, ba dee doop da da ga ba da ba dee doop da, and not ba dee da ga dee da ba da ga da da da. That would feel more mechanic. Ba dee dee ba dee ba dee da. And syncopation, again, it really depends. It's easier for people who grew up on American and to a lesser extent British music. Much more difficult to people who grew up on classical music, because us people who grew up on classical music, listening to classical music and music that does not have syncopation, tend to end their phrases and start them, especially end them on the one instead of ba dee ba da ba 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 ba. But this all can be learned, of course. having rhythmic variety and interest, where the variety and interest comes from different placement within the grid of the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and within the eighth. We're not talking about the variety that one can find in slower movements of Beethoven, for example. We do not see a lot of, I mean, we do see, but not as much as the variety that comes from syncopation and displacement of ideas. If I do de ba da, be da da, be da da, okay, same idea displaced. Learning harmony, we have to know the chords first of all, okay, for each key. There are many chords to know. It's okay, it's all finite information, but a lot of it. And we have to be familiar with different types of progressions that are typical in the jazz genre. Then we have some substitutions, just to mention two of them. The tritone substitution, instead of doing 1, 2, 5, 1, doing 2, 5, 1, that's a sub. Or that's the back door. And upper structures are a bit more complex. These are chords, these are triads that are made of tensions, of added notes to the chord. So if I have this chord, within this chord, I have this chord. It's not this one. And I can play it here as a separate one. If you know, you are the sunshine of my life, then this chord, sort of not belonging there, does belong there. It's made of the 3, the 13th, and the flat 9th of the original chord, and it makes a new triad. So it's another layer of harmony. And then there are all the different ways to play them, what we call voicings in jazz, different meaning than voicing in classical music and in piano tuning. This just means what notes we pick. If I play C major like this, like this, like this, or like this, okay, there are various ways to play it. In order to learn the repertoire, we have to learn the harmonic progressions, the melodies of the songs, and it's good to know conventional performances, intros, the grooves, the vamps. So there are tunes that, let's say, A Night in Tunisia has this intro. So if someone tells you, let's play A Night in Tunisia, it's better to know that this thing is the intro, and as a bass player, you have to play it, or as someone who plays with the bass, you have to know that the bass is going to play it. That's probably how you're going to start the song. There is a question here. I played C major 7th, but refer to it as C major. Is that the... yeah. Sorry, the question was, I called the chord C major and I played C major 7th. So as I mentioned before, because we don't have triads in jazz, very often we would just say major and not say that it's a major 7th. Not only that, I play C major 7th with the 6th and the 9th and sharp 11th, so I'm not going to say all of these things. I just freely add them. And personally, I hate it when in arrangements I'm given specific notes to add. It kind of ruins all the fun and defeats the purpose of playing jazz. It would be a bit like for someone who plays the harpsichord to get an entire set of music instead of just figured bass and tell them to play what's there. As you may know, people in Bach's time were upset with Bach that he actually wrote out all the parts instead of letting them improvise, because the idea was that they used to improvise over the chords. Now, learning how to improvise, we want to be able to create melodies which fit a chord. And this has to do with the with colliding two chord notes I mentioned before. So if I know how to create a melody that fits a chord and then a melody which connects the chords, I'm pretty much there, right? I can do anything with any set of chords. But I did this with my vocabulary. I'll just very quickly show you the things that I mentioned here. Chord tones. Other notes that I had. steps, skips, up, down, different rhythms. Okay. Um, sounds easy, right? These are the building blocks. We'll see in a minute how we practice these things. So, we have to practice each one of these. So, a few words about my teaching experience. I've been teaching for years, and I had hundreds of students, including beginners, people who are classically trained, and also some seasoned performers, some people who have degrees in jazz performance who came to me for help. And I collected a lot of material during the years. I used to actually, while teaching, whenever there was some kind of an idea that seemed like a general idea that can be applied for other people as well, I would just like take my phone out and write a little comment. And I got to a few hundreds of comments like this with several exercises and ideas and insights and so on. And it was actually during COVID that I consolidated all the material. And I ended up having this kind of very systematic method where I teach the progressions, melodic scales, and standards. So I take tunes and I already know how I start. Sometimes it even feels a bit rigid to me, not to the students because they don't know in other way, but it works and it's very systematic. So I start with a very simple progression with very simple melodic scales. Um, just for example, I started asking people just to pick two notes from each chord. I take a 2-5-1 progression. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And on this, just pick two notes from the chord in this given rhythm. So it's not so scary to improvise. It's basically picking two notes and that's it. Um, and I have to say, partly to my surprise, the process is proven. Okay, I've had people who are fast, people who are slow, people who have had issues with rhythm, with ear, with sound, with all sorts of things. And I have to be thankful to each one of them because especially the ones who have difficulties kind of forced me into looking for exercises and ways to get them to know the material. And now I really feel it's a fact that I get people who come to me and after a while they just improvise. Um, does not mean that they all become, it's not that anybody who can speak English can become a great author, right? But they can actually express themselves freely improvising their own lines. Now, when I teach jazz, my philosophy has a few guiding rules. Uh, First of all, only legitimate playing. I don't do temporary compromises. I'm saying this because I know that some people start with, let's say, doing pentatonic scales, right? As I demonstrated earlier. They kind of say, well, we just want the student to improvise something so they feel more free. And they'll play some wrong notes, but then we'll later correct them. And I don't like that. It does work for some people, for sure. But I can say that generally when I get students who improvise kind of freely with many mistakes, it's usually much more difficult to work with them and get them to speak with proper grammar, let's say, and play the right notes than it is to start with someone a fresh start. And again, if I equate it to the learning language, if someone speaks with many mistakes, and they're already fluent, making all these mistakes, it's very difficult to tell them no, stop, don't speak now and do only this, do only that. So from lesson one, basically this example I gave you, these two notes can be the beginning of the best solo ever played, right? There is nothing compromised about them. It's totally legitimate. I try to give manageable quantities of material. Nothing like, okay, now practice this in all the keys and things like that. It just doesn't work. And on the contrary, the opposite works. I see that if I teach someone or myself to do something in one key very well, then the second key is going to be much, much easier. The third key is easier. And the other keys, very often we don't even have to do it, or we just have to touch on them because we learn how to learn. We understand that our brains understand the principle. So we don't have to do it all. And I also teach improvisation from the start, the way I just demonstrated. I don't let people play other people's improvisations or to memorize licks. The equivalent again in language would be to have a phrase book. I think it's wrong because I don't want to be speaking in phrases. I want to speak my own way. And again, it always works. Very often people in the beginning play ideas that are not that great, and then I can guide them, but I never tell them what to play. I can give them a few options, but more likely I'll ask them to find a few options. Let's say I would say from this note, go to this note. Let's find a few ways. That's one. That's another one. That's another one. Okay, and then they can pick, but it's their own ideas. And lastly, I try to include all the elements: the sound, the harmony, the rhythm, and the improvisation, and of course repertoire, learn songs. I don't say, well, now we'll just focus on your rhythm and we'll touch the improvisation later. No, I really think everything has to be moving gradually towards conclusion. And everything has to be practical. I don't do theory on the page alone. I explain things on the paper, but we always play them. It's about music. It has to be heard, right? It reminds me that Errol Garner's biography, the great pianist, he could not read music. The title of his biography is "No One Can Hear You Read," and I think it's beautiful because we really want to hear what's happening. So we want to play everything that we're learning. So I compiled a few ideas for practicing. Of course, you have to know what to practice, but again, this is some kind of introductory lecture. So practicing sound, short cells. The reason is that if I'm used to playing a certain way and I play something long, usually after a while, I'll go back to my habit. This is not exclusive to playing jazz. I find it that if, let's say, I play a Bach fugue and I tell myself, okay, I want to play it with this and that in mind, and I'm playing the entire fugue, after half a page, I'm like, oh, where was I? I go back to the old habit. So if I want to practice that, practice short scales. And then the way is to practice given melodies. Instead of having my brain busy on the improvisation and practice my sound, I say, you know what? I'll just play a melody that I already know. It can even be a classical melody, right? It'll be funny, but why not? But to have a given melody, let's say from Take the A Train, instead of playing, or I hear all sorts, tap, doop, tap, doop, 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 doop. I create a new habit like that. I practice that slower. And I watch for the long, meaning I have long, short, long, short, long. And I'm saying this because very often people do this. So they play everything short, but I never said things have to be played short. They have to be separate. So the long has to be longer than the short. Tap, 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 tap. The spaces between the notes have to be identical. If I have a quarter or something long, and not. This is a common mistake. And it's always surprising how people who are classically trained and can follow slurs and articulation markings kind of get lost in this because it is different and it's very atypical to classical music. And staying expressive all the time, at all time, it's probably the most important thing. Otherwise, first of all, you will forget what you're practicing, and secondly, it's meaningless practicing. You're practicing something that is completely useless. We don't want to play non-expressive music. Practicing rhythm. First of all, some people have an issue just going from swinging eighth to straight eighth. Use the same rhythm. I go one, ba, da, 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 da. Da, da. Okay. Ba, ba, dee, ba, dum. Basically the same one, and I go back and forth until it's like in my brain. Stability and groove. I would tap quarters, halves, and whole notes. So I'll do these quarters, and then by the way, this can be a great thing also for classical music. Just try it. Worst case, you'll just lose a minute, and then you'll get the conclusion time wrong. But really, by all means, if I do or something like this, just change the meter from 4/4 to 2/4 to 1/4. There is such a thing, right? 4/4, 2/2, and 1/1. Get larger and smaller units, and see what it does to you. And then alternate tapping, left and right, and speaking. So I can do da 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 da, or da da, or da 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 da. It's more difficult than it sounds. Try it. Now, for practicing the rhythm, we want to do it against a steady beat always, all the syncopations. And that's something that I do ask people to play, although it's not practical. Okay, this will be the part of the bass layer, but I just do it to help myself feeling the steady beat, and help me avoid the one when I play syncopation. And then there is rhythmic priority. I want to prioritize rhythm over the melody. Okay, this is something that is one of the essentials of jazz aesthetics. We think of rhythm, then we put a melody to it. And the way to do it, two ways, very good practicing ways. One is to use fixed rhythms. Let's say I do da, ba di da da. So I'll go ba, ba di ba ba, da, ba da da ba. Very powerful. I can then, by the way, switch the rhythm, displace it like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And speak a rhythmic solo. Ba di da, bika, ba di di da ga, di, ba di ga do ba, di ga ga. Then there is the variety of rhythm. Being able to play out any of the 8 points in the bar, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 da da ba, 1 da da ba, di ga di da. That's the end of 2, right? 1 and 2 and. I want to feel comfortable anywhere, and I want to be able to displace any rhythm. So there's displacement, there is displacement, and it can be anywhere in the bar. Practicing harmony, this is that's where it becomes, it's a bit like memorizing, I don't know, patterns. Takes time, has to be gradual. And I always recommend practicing independently and in tunes. So I have a certain progression. I play it by itself, I play it within a tune. Sing each part. Let's say, okay, and get familiar with the sound. We want to be able to recognize the harmony. The way you eat something, it's like, there is a, is that cinnamon? Yeah, there is a cinnamon here, right? That's the sharp 11. That's the cinnamon, right? And this is the vanilla, right? And the vanilla by itself is kind of, that's bitter, right? The vanilla, but the vanilla with sugar is kind of good. We like it. Okay, so we really want to get the sound there. To learn repertoire, learn the melody and the harmonic progression by itself, just know it. Understand the progression, and I break it into sections the way I would do with a classical piece of music, and concentrate on the treble spots. I know it sounds completely obvious to anybody who practices classical music, right? We see the place with all the 16th notes, like all the like dark parts, and we know this is going to take practice. It doesn't look like that in jazz. In jazz, it looks like, oh, I have this progression that is weird and I have to practice that. We don't see many notes, but we see chords that are not linked the same way. Always good to check and validate the source because there are many, many sources for each song, and learn it at least in the one key, which is the common key. Check what key it's performed in. Listen to some important recordings. Check the lyrics. I'm guilty of not doing it enough. And it's always good to create some arrangement, even if you're never going to play it, just to familiarize yourself better with the song. And always good to learn it in additional keys. My recommendation, if you don't want to do all 12, which I never do a major third above and below, so you get 3 different keys that are far enough from one another. To practice improvisation, I start with short cells. Those 4 notes. And I have to know my building blocks, the chord tones, the neighbors, the passing tones. I have to practice improvising on the chord, as I mentioned before, and how to connect chords, and always in rhythm. I don't go. I want to make sure that everything I do is in rhythm, and everything I do is within a progression. The chords do not exist by themselves; they're always part of something. There are all sorts of special exercises that I give. I'll just demonstrate one quickly. I don't really have time for that. Let's do it quickly. I call it the running eighths. In order to get these lines that are kind of consecutive eighths. Or I'll do it on the autumn leaves. More common on faster notes. It sounds very boring when it's on slow rhythm because the rhythm is very boring. And so there are ways to practice it. I start from the end of the phrase. This is the first exercise. Next one. And then and when eventually I play all the eighths, I'm thinking like I'm going there, I'm going there, I'm going here, I'm going there, I'm going. So I practice these cells that are ta-ta-pa-tam, pa-ta-pa-tam. I'm going there. I'm going to a chord note on the 1 and on the 3 of the bar. And then when I have to assemble the long line, this is how I create it. I never practice any licks, okay, to do that. And then we get to the real jazz solo. We want to have a variety. We want to have a balance of elements. Some degree of predictability, and of course some of surprise, tension and release, development, sequence of events, sequence of emotions, even more important, sequence of events, and interaction with an ensemble. It's a lot, right? These are the things that we can do once we master the other things I mentioned so far. Once we master these things, ideally when I play, I want to feel and not think. I just think what my emotions are, what I want to hear, what's the sound. I'm imagining a certain sound in my head, and then I play what I want to hear. I have a groove. Again, I have it. I don't need the ensemble for it. I can add some spices with the harmony, and I know my tunes. Then I can create an emotional journey as a rendition. And that's the really important thing, I think. It's not about everything I mentioned so far are the tools for this goal of creating some emotional journey. So this is the time. If you have questions, I hope you guys are with me because I don't see any cameras. But this is the time to invite you all to join my 5-day challenge starting in 2 days. And the challenge is to be able to improvise your own melodies in just 5 days. There'll be 5 live sessions of 15 minutes. They'll be recorded so you can watch them and rewatch them as long as you want. In each session, I'll give one musical idea and two simple assignments. An example for the first session will be this thing, which I showed you earlier, 2 notes from the chord. And we'll cover the entire basic concept of tonal melodies. Any tonal music, if it's classical, pop, jazz, rock, whatever, you name it, of how to collide the notes into chord tones. And you'll get a taste of my entire method, which I call Unveiling Jazz Improvisation. That's the name of my course, which I'm planning to start in a week after the challenge. Basically, if the challenge works for you, you'll probably do great in the course. If not, then probably not. So it's a great way, free way, to know whether this is good for you. And this is the link. I should drop it in the chat as well. I'll also send it your way, of course, by mail. I'm not sure how to do it. Maybe I'll just write it here manually. That'll be fun. UV method. Any questions, guys? I'm very proud that I managed to squeeze all this information in during this time. Challenge. I think this is it. Method.com. It's always fun with the turned off cameras. I don't know if anybody is actually here. Anyway, so I enjoyed it. Thank you, Ian. I'm happy that you enjoyed it. I did. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and also ask about my other lectures. I have a set of lectures. Anybody who registers for my courses, by the way, gets also access to all my pre-recorded lectures. And I surely hope to see some of you, if not all of you, in my challenge on Monday, the day after tomorrow. Okay, thanks for being with me, and until next time, take care. I'll stop the recording.